I held the safety of the entire eastern seaboard in my hands, routing 10 massive cargo trains carrying volatile chemicals. Then, the new director, Luke Richardson, stormed in and fired me mid-shift for refusing to cut safety corners. He wanted speed. I gave him silence. I triggered the emergency brakes on every line, freezing the national network and costing the company $1 million every single hour. Before this story continues, tell me, where are you watching from today and what's the temperature? I hope it's warmer than the icy look Richardson gave me right before he destroyed his own career. The control center didn't smell like ozone or diesel. It smelled like stale coffee and nervous sweat. But to me, it was a sanctuary. At 45 years old, I wasn't just a senior master dispatcher. I was a conductor of a symphony made of steel and momentum. It was 10:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, usually a quiet shift. But in this business, quiet was just a holding pattern for chaos. I sat in front of the wall, a bank of 12 high-definition monitors curving around my ergonomic chair like the cockpit of a spacecraft. On those screens, glowing lines of green, yellow, and red represented millions of tons of freight moving at 60 miles per hour across the tri-state area. "Oliver, I've got CSX 490 requesting clearance for the switch at Junction Delta," Mary Kim said. She was the junior dispatcher, sharp as a tack, but still prone to the jitters when the board lit up like a Christmas tree. She sat 2 desks down, her headset wire coiled around her finger, a nervous tick. "Check the velocity on Amtrak 88 coming southbound," I said, not even looking away from my main sector map. My eyes were locked on a heavy hauler, the Iron Mule, train ID 774, carrying liquefied natural gas. "Amtrak is running 3 minutes hot. If you open Delta now, you'll pinch them at the bridge. Hold CSX 490 for 90 seconds. Let the passenger line clear." Mary tapped her keyboard, her eyes darting between screens. "You're right, gap is tight. Holding 490. I took a sip of my lukewarm dark roast. This was the job. It wasn't about moving trains, it was about managing time and space. You had to feel the weight of the cargo in your gut. You had to know that a loaded coal train took 2 miles to stop, while an intermodal express could dance through the switches if you had the nerve. "Nice catch, Oliver," Mary said, her shoulders relaxing. I didn't see the Amtrak surge. "That's why I'm in the big chair, Mary," I replied, a small smile touching my face. "It's not just about what you see, it's about what you know is coming." The room hummed with the low drone of cooling fans and the quiet murmur of radio traffic. "Dispatch, this is 774. Holding at marker 19er, over." I keyed my mic. "Copy that, 7 to 74. You've got a clear board and 2 mics. Keep the pressure up." For 20 years, I had kept this network breathing. I knew every rusty switch, every blind curve, and every gradient change from here to the coast. I had a reputation for being the metronome. Under my watch, trains didn't late, and they certainly didn't crash. But the atmosphere in the control center had shifted in the last month. The air felt thinner, sharper. The company had been bought out by a private equity firm, and the old guard, the railroad men who had oil under their fingernails, were being replaced by guys who had never stepped on ballast in their lives. I checked the timestamp, 10:28 p.m. The board was green, the flow was perfect, and then the security door hissed open. It wasn't the slow, rhythmic opening of a colleague coming in for the graveyard shift. It was a fast, aggressive slide. I didn't turn around, but I heard the click-clack of expensive leather loafers on the anti-static floor tiles. It was a sound that didn't belong here. "Turn up the lights," a voice commanded. It was smooth, arrogant, and entirely too loud for the sanctity of the dispatch floor. I didn't move. "We keep the lights low to reduce glare on the monitors," I said, my eyes still scanning Sector 4. I said, "Turn them up." A heavy hand reached past my shoulder and slapped the dimmer switch on the wall console. The overhead fluorescence flickered to life, washing out the crucial contrast of my screens. I squinted, fighting the sudden glare, and finally swiveled my chair around. Standing there was Luke Richardson. He looked like he had just stepped out of a GQ photo shoot for Villains of Wall Street. He was younger than me, maybe late 30s, wearing a navy suit that cost more than my car. He held a tablet in one hand like a weapon. "Mr. Richardson," I said, keeping my voice level, "to what do we owe the pleasure at this hour?" He didn't look at me. He was looking at the room with a sneer of disgust, as if the very existence of the dispatch center offended his sensibilities. "Productivity check, Kelly," he said, tapping his tablet screen. "And from what I'm seeing on the dashboard, we have a problem." Luke Richardson was the new regional director of operations. He had been here for 3 weeks, and in that time, he had used the word synergy more times than he had said hello. He didn't know a locomotive from a lawnmower, but he knew spreadsheets. He walked over to my station, invading my personal space. The smell of expensive musky cologne overpowered the coffee. "Explain this," he demanded, shoving the tablet in my face. I leaned back, adjusting my glasses. The screen showed a bar graph with a red line dipping slightly below a dotted green line. "It's a graph, Luke. You'll have to be more specific." "Don't get cute with me, Oliver," he snapped. "This is the throughput efficiency metric for Sector 4. You're currently running at 92% capacity. The corporate target is 98%. You are lagging." I looked from the tablet to the actual board, the real world, where 10,000 tons of steel were currently hurtling through the night. "Luke, look at the board," I pointed. "We have track maintenance on Line 6 near the river. I have to route the heavy cargo onto the secondary lines. That slows down the average speed by 10 miles per hour, but it keeps the crews safe and prevents track warping." "Excuses," Luke muttered, swiping to another screen. I looked at the maintenance logs. The crew isn't scheduled to be on the tracks until midnight. That's an hour and a half from now. "They're prepping the equipment," I explained, trying to keep my patience. "And besides, we have a fog advisory rolling in off the coast. I've increased the spacing between the hazmat haulers. Safety protocol dictates a 2-mile buffer and low visibility." Luke laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Safety protocol? Or lazy protocol? I've been analyzing the data from the last 5 years. You dispatchers treat these protocols like religious texts. They are guidelines, Kelly. Guidelines." Mary Kim had stopped typing. She was staring at us, her face pale. She knew, just as I did, that guidelines were written in blood. Every rule in the book existed because someone, somewhere, had died when it was ignored. "They are federal regulations, Luke," I said, my voice hardening. "Not guidelines. If I tighten the gaps, and a sensor fails, or a deer jumps on the track, we have a pileup. A pileup with the chemicals we're moving tonight isn't just an accident. It's an ecological disaster." Luke walked around my chair, standing behind me, looking at the screens he didn't understand. "You see chaos," he said softly. "I see inefficiency. I see lost revenue. Every minute a train sits idle or moves at half speed, we bleed money. The board wants to see a 15% increase in throughput by Q3. That starts tonight." He pointed a manicured finger at a blinking red icon on the far left screen. "That train? Train 909. Why is it stopped?" 909 is a chemical tanker," I said instantly. "It's sitting in the siding at milepost 40 because its wheel bearing sensor threw a yellow flag. It's cooling down. The inspection crew is 10 minutes out." "A yellow flag isn't a red flag," Luke countered. "Yellow means caution. It doesn't mean stop. In my book, yellow on a bearing sensor means we check it before the wheel melts off and derails the train into the reservoir," I said. "It stays put." Luke's face tightened. He clearly wasn't used to hearing the word no. He tapped his tablet again. "Override it," he commanded. I blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "Override the sensor hold. Get 909 moving. We have a delivery window in the city at 4 a.m. If it sits there for inspection, it misses the slot, and we pay a penalty fee." I turned my chair fully around to face him. "Luke, if that bearing seizes at speed, you're looking at a catastrophic derailment. I am not moving that train until a mechanic puts eyes on it." Luke leaned down, placing both hands on the arms of my chair, trapping me. His eyes were cold, dead sharks swimming in a sea of corporate ambition. "And I am telling you, as your director, that the sensor is faulty. We just upgraded the software. It's a glitch. Move the train." The control center went deadly silent. Even the hum of the servers seemed to drop an octave. Mary Kim was pretending to look at her shoes. I looked Luke Richardson dead in the eye. I had 20 years of seniority on him. I had a pension I was building toward. I had a reputation. But mostly, I had a conscience. "I can't do that, Luke," I said, my voice quiet but projecting clearly across the room. "I am the master dispatcher on duty. Under FRA rules, I have the final authority on safety holds. I don't care what your title is, unless you have a certified mechanic's report in your hand saying that bearing is fine, 909 stays parked. Luke straightened up, brushing invisible dust off his suit jacket. He took a deep breath, composing himself. When he spoke again, his voice was terrifyingly calm. You know, Oliver, I was warned about you. The old guard, resistant to change, obstinate. He walked over to the main schematic, the big board projected on the wall. We have 10 cargo trains active right now, he noted. If we push 909 and we route the coal haulers through the express line instead of the freight loop, he traced a line with his finger. We can clear the sector by midnight. That saves us 3 hours of labor costs and hits the bonus metrics for the quarter. The express line is rated for passenger rail, not heavy freight, I said, standing up. The grade is too steep for the tonnage. You burn out the brakes on the descent. The brakes are rated for it. Luke dismissed me with a wave of his hand. I checked the specs. Specs on a PDF are different than physics on a rainy night in November, I shouted, losing my cool. You cannot run a 10,000-ton coal train down a 2% grade at express speeds. You will lose the train. I am giving you a direct order, Luke said, turning on his heel. Route 909 to the main line. Route the coal trains to the express track. Increase system velocity to maximum authorized speed. I crossed my arms. No. Luke smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found the weakness in the fence. Refusal to follow a direct order from a superior, he recited, as if reading from a handbook. That's insubordination. It's grounds for immediate termination. Fire me then, I challenged, but I'm not killing people for your bonus. I thought he was bluffing. I thought the union contract, my tenure, and basic common sense would protect me. I thought he would storm out, write me up, and we'd fight it out in a meeting tomorrow. I was wrong. Luke pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Security? Yes, this is Director Richardson. I need an escort to the control center immediately. We have a hostile employee. He hung up and looked at me. Pack your box, Kelly. You're done. And before you leave, I'm going to have the junior dispatcher make the changes. He turned his gaze to Mary. She flinched as if he had thrown a rock at her. Mary, is it? Luke smiled, showing too many teeth. Congratulations. You're acting master dispatcher. Move train 909. Now. Mary looked at me, her eyes wide with panic. She was 24. She had student loans. She was terrified. She stammered. Don't do it, Mary, I warned. If you don't, Luke said, his voice dropping to a silky whisper, you'll be walking out the door right behind him, and I'll make sure you're blacklisted from every logistics company on the East Coast. The security door buzzed. 2 uniformed guards stepped in. Luke pointed at me. Escort Mr. Kelly out of the building. He is trespassing. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. Not for my job, but for what was about to happen on those tracks. If Mary routed those trains the way he wanted, disasters weren't a possibility. They were a mathematical certainty. I looked at the board one last time. 10 trains, millions of pounds of momentum, and a madman at the wheel. I had to leave, but I didn't have to leave the system vulnerable. As the guards approached, I leaned down to my keyboard to log off. Step away from the console, Luke barked. Just logging out, Director, I said. Protocol. I typed in my logout sequence, but I didn't hit enter on the logout command. My fingers flew across the keys, executing a specific macro I had coded years ago for a doomsday scenario. A theoretical terrorist attack or total system failure. It was a command that overrode individual sector controls. It was the nuclear option. I hit enter. The enter key made a satisfying mechanical clack that seemed to echo louder than the shout of the security guard. Sir, step away. The lead guard, a burly man named Henderson, who I'd shared donuts with for 5 years, barked. He looked apologetic, but he had his orders. I raised my hands, stepping back from the console. On the screen, a small, unassuming terminal window blinked once, then minimized into the background. To the untrained eye, to Luke Richardson's eye, it looked like the system was simply logging me off. The screens flickered, the user profile, "Oh Kelly," vanished, and the default login prompt appeared. Escort him out, Luke said, smoothing his tie. He didn't even look at me anymore. He turned his attention to Mary. Mary, log in. Use your credentials. We have a schedule to keep. I felt Henderson's hand on my bicep. Not rough, but firm. Don't do it, Mary, I said, my voice cutting through the room one last time. You log in now, you own whatever happens next. Luke spun around, his face flushing red. Get him out of here, now! You're making a mistake, Luke, I shouted as Henderson and his partner marched me toward the security doors. You think you can just push buttons and make the world move faster? Physics doesn't care about your quarterly bonus. Physics doesn't care about your stock options. Save it for the exit interview, Luke yelled back. If we even give you one. The last thing I saw before the heavy steel doors hissed shut was Mary Kim's trembling hand hovering over the keyboard, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights Luke had demanded. She looked like a kid asked to disarm a bomb with a pair of rusty pliers. The hallway was quiet, a jarring contrast to the adrenaline pumping through my veins. Sorry, Artie. I mean, Oliver, Henderson muttered as we walked toward the elevators. He's on a warpath tonight. It's okay, Henderson, I said, adjusting my jacket. My heart was racing, not from the physical confrontation, but from what I knew was silently propagating through the fiber optic cables beneath our feet. Do me a favor? You know I can't let you back in, he said. I don't want back in. Just, when the alarms start going off, tell Mary to look at the global hold status. Just tell her that. Henderson frowned, pressing the button for the ground floor. Alarms? What alarms? I looked at my watch. 10:35 p.m. The command script had a 3-minute delay built in, a fail-safe I had programmed to give a dispatcher time to cancel if it was an accidental trigger. You'll hear them, I said softly. The night air in the parking lot hit me like a physical slap. It was a cold, damp November night, the kind that seeps into your bones. The automatic doors of the operations center slid shut behind me, severing me from the world I had built for 2 decades. I stood there on the asphalt, holding a cardboard box Henderson had graciously allowed me to pack quickly. A framed photo of my late wife, a chipped World's Okayest Dispatcher mug, and a stress ball shaped like a locomotive. 20 years of service reduced to 12 pounds of junk. You're fired. The words replayed in my head. I should have been panicked. I was 45, with a mortgage and a kid in college. Being fired for insubordination and gross misconduct was a death sentence in this industry. Luke Richardson would make sure I never worked in logistics again. But as I walked to my 10-year-old sedan, I didn't feel fear. I felt a grim, cold satisfaction. Luke thought he had removed the obstacle. He thought that by physically removing me from the building, he had removed my influence over the network. That was his mistake. He viewed the railroad as a hierarchy of people, where the director tells the manager, who tells the dispatcher, who tells the engineer. He didn't understand that the railroad is a network of signals. And I spoke the language. I tossed the box into the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel. I didn't start the car. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Yeah? A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Sledge, wake up, I said. Frankie Sledge Russo was the union representative for the tri-state area. He was a man who ate gravel for breakfast and sued railroads for lunch. Oliver, it's nearly 11. You better be calling to tell me you won the lottery. I got fired, Frankie, for cause, insubordination. Silence on the line. Then, the rustle of bed sheets and the distinct click of a lamp turning on. Start talking fast. New director, Richardson. He ordered me to bypass a red flag on a hazmat tanker with a faulty bearing sensor. Then he ordered me to route heavy coal trains onto the express passenger grade to pad his metrics. I refused. He called security. He ordered a bypass on a hazmat hold? Sledge's voice dropped an octave, entering what we called the kill zone. Did you get that in writing? No. Verbal orders, witnessed by Mary Kim and the security feed. He'll delete the feed, Sledge said instantly. And he'll pressure the girl. It's your word against the director. Not exactly, I said, watching the third-floor windows of the operations center. I didn't just leave Frankie. I initiated the red protocol. The what? The dead man's switch. It's a macro for a total system lockout in case of unauthorized seizure of the control room. I designed it for counterterrorism scenarios post 9/11. Oliver? Sledge sounded choked. What did you do? I didn't let him crash the trains, Frankie, I whispered, staring at the building. I stopped them. All of them. At 10:38 p.m., exactly 3 minutes after I left the desk, the world stopped. I didn't hear the screeching of brakes. I was 5 miles away from the nearest track. But I felt it. I could picture it with perfect clarity. In my mind's eye, I saw the signal towers all across Sector 4 simultaneously flip from green or yellow to solid, unblinking red. Inside the cabs of 10 massive locomotives, the automatic train control, ATC systems, would shriek a piercing alarm. Penalty brake application. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a computer-controlled override. When the system receives a global stop command, it assumes the control center has been compromised or destroyed. It dumps the air from the brake lines immediately. Thousands of brake shoes slammed against steel wheels spinning at 50-60 miles per hour. A shower of orange sparks would be lighting up the forests of Pennsylvania and the industrial yards of New Jersey. The coupling slack would bang together like thunderclaps. Boom, 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 as the cars compressed. I pulled up the public tracking app on my phone. It was a simplified version of the big board, meant for logistics customers to track their shipments. Usually it was a dance of moving dots. Now it was frozen. Train 774, hazmat, speed 0. MPH. Status, emergency stop. Train 9 up is 9, the broken bearing. Speed 0, MPH. Status, locked. Amtrak. 88, speed 0, MPH. Status, signal hold. Every single dot turned red. I looked up at the operations center building. I couldn't see inside, but I knew exactly what was happening. The alarms would be deafening. A system-wide lockout triggers a klaxon that sounds like a submarine dive alarm. Luke Richardson would be screaming. He would be pounding on the desk. He would be ordering Mary to fix it. But she couldn't. The red protocol I had triggered wasn't just a stop command. It was a security lockout. It froze the dispatch terminals. To unlock the board, you needed 2 things. A physical key that was kept in a safe that only the CEO and the Federal Railroad Administration, FRA, had access to. The biometrics of the senior master dispatcher who initiated the lock. Me. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't Sledge. It was an unknown number, then again. Then a text message from Mary. Oliver. The board is dead. Luke is screaming. Everything is red. Help. I texted back 2 words. Stay calm. Then I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The trains were stopped. The hazardous chemicals weren't going to spill. The coal trains weren't going to careen off the express tracks. I had saved the cargo. I had saved lives. And in doing so, I had just cost the company roughly $16,000 per minute. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the lot. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going to war. The silence on a railway is heavier than the noise. When a train is moving, it's alive. A breathing beast of air compressors, diesel engines, and steel-on-steel rhythm. When it stops unexpectedly, especially in the middle of nowhere, it feels like the world has held its breath. I drove toward the only place I knew was safe, a 24-hour diner called The Junction near the old switch yards. It was neutral ground. Cops, railroaders, and truckers all ate there. My phone was vibrating so hard on the passenger seat, it was slowly walking itself toward the floor mat. I glanced at the screen. Luke Richardson calling, decline. Luke Richardson calling, decline. Operations desk calling, decline. I pulled into the diner, the neon sign buzzing in the damp air. I needed coffee, and I needed to strategize. I had launched the nuke, but I hadn't yet dealt with the fallout. Inside, I slid into a booth in the back corner. I ordered a black coffee and pulled out a notepad. 10:45 p.m. The trains had been stopped for 7 minutes. Cost estimate, late fees, $500 per minute per train. Track blockage penalties, Amtrak, $5,000 per minute. Crew overtime, negligible for now, but climbing. We were looking at about $150,000 in damages already. By midnight, it would be over $1 million. I took a sip of coffee. My hand was shaking slightly, not from caffeine, from the realization that I had just committed what could legally be construed as industrial sabotage. If I couldn't prove why I did it, I wasn't just fired. I was going to federal prison. The door of the diner chimed. I looked up, expecting Sledge. Instead, a young man in a conductor's uniform walked in. He looked shell-shocked. He pulled off his cap, and ran a hand through his hair. I recognized him, Jimmy Rookie Miller. He was supposed to be on the Iron Mule, the hazmat train. He spotted me and froze. Then he rushed over to my booth. "Mr. Kelly?" "Oliver?" He looked frantic. "What the hell is going on? We just dumped air at milepost 50, nearly threw the engineer through the windshield. Dispatch is dead air. Nobody is answering the radio." "Sit down, Jimmy," I said calmly. "You okay?" Yeah, we're okay, but we're stuck on the main line. I walked to the road to get cell service. The board is dark?" "The board is locked," I corrected. "Jimmy, listen to me. Before the brakes tripped, did you notice anything about your train?" Jimmy frowned, confused. "Notice what? We were running green. Think the feel of the drag, the gauges." "Well," Jimmy hesitated. "The rear brake pipe pressure was fluctuating. Just a bit. The engineer thought it was a sensor glitch." "It wasn't a glitch," I said grimly. "Richardson ordered the maintenance crews to bypass the brake line inspections to get you out of the yard faster. If you had hit the downgrade at River Bend..." Jimmy's face went white. "We would have been a runaway." "Exactly. That's why you're stopped." Jimmy stared at me. "You did this? You dumped the whole network?" "I had to." My phone rang again. This time the ID didn't say Richardson. It said Gabriel Moretti. I answered immediately. "Gabe." "Oliver?" The voice on the other end was sharp, crisp, and devoid of sleepiness despite the hour. "I just got a call from a source at the FRA. They're saying the entire eastern sector is under a code red lockout. My source says your employee ID is tagged to the shutdown command. Tell me you have a really, really good reason." "Richardson tried to force a hazmat train with bad brakes onto a passenger line to pad his bonus," I said. "He fired me when I refused. I locked the system to prevent him from killing people." A long pause. Then the sound of a heavy leather chair creaking. "Okay," Gabe said. His voice shifted from curious friend to the gavel. "Don't say another word to anyone. Not to the cops, not to the company, not to your grandmother. I'm on my way. Where are you?" "The Junction Diner." "Sit tight. And Oliver, if they tried to run bad brakes on a hazmat line, we're not just going to defend you. We're going to bury them." Back at the operations center, chaos reigned. I wasn't there, but Mary Kim filled me in later. Luke Richardson had gone from arrogant to apoplectic. He was screaming at the IT guys, who were frantically typing on keyboards that refused to respond. "Bypass it! Hack it! I don't care! Just turn it back on!" Luke yelled, slamming his fist onto my desk. "We can't, sir," the lead IT tech stammered. "It's a hard-coded firmware lock. It's designed to resist external cyber attacks. The only way to override it without the key is to physically replace the server blades, which takes 6 hours, or what? Or we get Mr. Kelly to scan his handprint." Luke pulled out his phone. "Get the police. Tell them a disgruntled former employee has hijacked critical infrastructure. Tell them it's a hostage situation. I want him in handcuffs and dragged back here within the hour." Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. 11:30 p.m. The stoppage had rippled outward. It wasn't just our 10 trains anymore. Commuter lines that shared our tracks were backed up into the city. Thousands of passengers were stranded on platforms, checking their watches and cursing the railroad. Factories waiting for just-in-time deliveries were shutting down assembly lines. The cost was escalating geometrically. $1,000 per hour. That was the magic number. That was the threshold where the board of directors woke up. At 11:45 p.m., a black town car pulled up to the security gate of the rail yard. It wasn't the police. It was Enzo Reed, the CEO. He walked into the control center wearing a tuxedo. He had been pulled out of a charity gala. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He walked with the terrifying stillness of a man who owned everything in the room. He looked at the dark screens. He looked at the sweating IT techs. Finally, he looked at Luke Richardson. "Report," Reed said softly. "It's Kelly," Luke spat, trying to regain control. "He sabotaged the system. He's holding the network for ransom because I fired him for incompetence." Reed looked at the red lights on the wall map. "Incompetence? Oliver Kelly has been the top-rated dispatcher in this company for 15 years. Why did you fire him?" "He refused a direct order to optimize the route." "Optimize?" Reed raised an eyebrow. "Or compromise." Before Luke could answer, the security phone rang. The guard at the gate picked it up, listened, and paled. "Mr. Reed?" "Sir," the guard stammered. There's a convoy at the gate. Police? Luke asked hopefully. No, sir. It's a lawyer, a Mr. Moretti, and he says he has the Federal Railroad Administration with him. Gabriel, the gavel. Moretti didn't walk, he glided. He was wearing a trench coat over a t-shirt, having clearly dressed in the dark, but he carried himself like he was wearing a three-piece suit. I watched him enter the diner first. He spotted me, nodded, and then held the door open for a woman I didn't recognize. She was sharp-featured, wearing a windbreaker with the letters FRA on the chest. Agent Kessler. They slid into the booth opposite me. Oliver, Gabe said, skipping the pleasantries. This is Agent Kessler, Federal Railroad Administration. Start from the beginning, every detail. Don't leave out a single sneeze. I took a deep breath. I told them about the shift, the productivity check, the order to ignore the bearing sensor on train 909, the order to route coal trains onto the express grade, the firing, and finally, the dead man's switch. Agent Kessler took notes on a small pad. She didn't look up until I mentioned the bearing sensor. You're saying he ordered a train to move with a code yellow bearing flag? She asked. Her voice was dry, professional. Yes, train 909, tanker cars carrying chlorine gas. Kessler stopped writing. She looked at Gabe, then back at me. Chlorine gas in a populated corridor. If that bearing seized, I said, leaning in, the wheel would have disintegrated within 5 miles. At 60 miles an hour, the derailment would have ruptured the tanks. You'd have a poison cloud drifting over the suburbs within 20 minutes. Can you prove he gave the order? Gabe asked. He'll deny it. He'll say you went rogue. The voice logs, I said. The dispatch room records all audio, unless he deletes them, Gabe finished. He can't, I said, allowing myself a small, grim smile. That's the other part of the dead man's switch. When the system locks down, it encrypts the last 4 hours of audio and video logs and uploads them to a remote cloud server, a server he doesn't have the password for. Gabe's eyes lit up. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. He looked at Agent Kessler. Agent, under federal law 49 CFR, tampering with safety devices or ordering the bypass of a safety hold is a felony, correct? It is, Kessler said, closing her notebook. And if what Mr. Kelly says is true, Director Richardson just attempted to turn a weapon of mass destruction loose on the state of Pennsylvania. Gabe stood up. He slapped a hand on my shoulder. Finish your coffee, Oliver. We're going back to the office. And we're going to make an entrance. You think they'll let us in? I asked. Oh, they'll let us in, Gabe said. Because right now, you're the only person in the world who can turn the trains back on. And every minute you don't, Enzo Reed loses $16,000. We have the leverage. Now, let's go use it. We walked out to Gabe's car. The night was still dark, but the silence of the trains felt less like a pause now, and more like a loaded gun pointed directly at Luke Richardson's head. The atmosphere inside the operations center had shifted from chaotic to funereal. The phones had stopped ringing because the staff had stopped answering them. There was nothing to tell the angry customers except, we don't know. When I walked back through those security doors, flanked by Gabriel and Agent Kessler, the room went dead silent. Luke Richardson was standing by the main console, his tie loosened, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked like a man trying to hold back the tide with a spoon. Sitting in my chair, was Enzo Reed, the CEO. Reed didn't look sweaty. He looked like a statue carved out of ice. He was scrolling through a tablet, presumably looking at the stock price plummeting in the after-hours markets. Well, Reed said, not looking up, the prodigal dispatcher returns. He's a trespasser, Luke barked, pointing a shaking finger at me. Security, arrest him. He hacked the mainframe. Sit down, Luke, Reed said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command cracked like a whip. Luke sat. Reed finally looked up. His eyes landed on me, then drifted to Gabriel, and finally settled on the FRA jacket worn by Agent Kessler. That was the moment I saw the first flicker of genuine fear in the CEO's eyes. A labor dispute was one thing, the feds were another. Mr. Kelly, Reed said smoothly, standing up and buttoning his tuxedo jacket. You have cost this company approximately $2 million in the last 90 minutes. I assume you are here to unlock the system? I am, I said, my voice steady, but not under his orders. I nodded toward Luke. He doesn't work here, Luke shouted. He was terminated for insubordination. I am here representing Mr. Kelly. Gabriel stepped forward, his voice projecting that courtroom baritone that terrified witnesses. And we are not here to negotiate a severance package. We are here to prevent you from being indicted for reckless endangerment and conspiracy to violate federal safety laws. Reed's eyes narrowed. Careful with your words, counselor. We're not guessing, Mr. Reed, Gabe continued, walking to the center of the room. My client enacted a safety lockout because Director Richardson ordered the movement of a train carrying volatile chlorine gas with a known, flagged braking defect. He also ordered the routing of heavy coal freight onto a passenger grade. Both actions are illegal. Lies! Luke stood up again. The sensor was glitched. I made an executive decision to optimize flow. Kelly is just an old dinosaur who couldn't handle the new metrics. Is that so? I asked, stepping up to the console. Then why were you so desperate to wipe the tapes? I looked at Mary Kim. She was still sitting at her station, looking small and terrified. Mary, I said gently. Did you log the maintenance request for train 909? Mary looked at Luke, then at Reed, then at me. I tried to, she whispered. Director Richardson canceled it. She's lying covering for him, Luke sneered. Mr. Reed, I said, turning to the CEO. The dead man's switch didn't just lock the brakes, it secured the evidence. The ghost logs. The ghost logs? Reed repeated, the ice in his voice cracking slightly. Every command entered, every microphone audio stream, every keystroke, I explained. When the red protocol initiates, it grabs the last 4 hours of data, encrypts it, and uploads it to a secure partition. It's designed to capture the black box data in the event of a catastrophic failure. I walked over to the main terminal. The screen still displayed the red system lockout banner. I can unlock the trains, Mr. Eitz. Reed, but before I do, I'm going to play the last 30 minutes of audio from this room, and Agent Kessler is going to listen. Luke lunged. No, you don't have authorization. Agent Kessler moved faster than I expected. She stepped between Luke and the console, holding up a hand. Director Richardson, sit down. If you interfere with a federal investigation, I will have you in handcuffs before you can blink. Luke froze. He looked at Reed for support. Reed just stared at him, his expression unreadable. Play it, Reed said. I typed in my biometric key. The system beeped. I didn't unlock the trains yet. Instead, I accessed the archives. I selected the timestamp, 10:25 p.m. The speakers above us crackled. Then, Luke's voice filled the room, loud and clear. Yellow means caution. It doesn't mean stop. In my book, yellow on a bearing sensor means we check it. That was me. Override it. I said, override the sensor hold. Get 909 moving. If it sits there for inspection, it misses the slot, and we pay a penalty fee. The room was deathly silent as the recording continued. We heard the argument about the coal trains. We heard the threat to Mary Kim. We heard the sneering contempt in Luke's voice when he said, specs on a PDF are different than physics. And then the smoking gun. The moment Luke hung himself. I am giving you a direct order. Route 909 to the main line, refusal to follow a direct order, is grounds for immediate termination. I stopped the playback. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Enzo Reed turned slowly to face Luke Richardson. The look on the CEO's face wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was calculation. He was doing the math on liability, insurance, and PR fallout. You ordered a bypass on a hazmat hold, Reed said quietly, to save, what? $4,000 in late fees? It was a strategy, Luke stammered, his face pale. The sensor was faulty. I was driving efficiency. The stock price, Reed interrupted, is going to tank the moment the market finds out we almost gassed Philadelphia because you wanted to save pennies. Agent Kessler, Gabe said, his voice ringing with triumph. I believe you have heard enough to establish probable cause? Agent Kessler didn't just nod. She pulled out her phone and made a call. This is Kessler. I need a forensic team at the CSX Northeast Control Center, immediately. We have a confirmed Title 49 violation involving hazardous materials. Bring the data extraction unit. She hung up and turned to the room. Nobody touches a computer. Nobody leaves. This is now a federal crime scene. Luke Richardson collapsed into his chair. You can't do this. I'm the director. Not anymore, Reed said. The CEO walked over to the main desk. He looked at me. Mr. Kelly, unlock the board. Get the trains moving safely. We can discuss your employment status. Later. No, I said. Reed blinked. Excuse me? I'll unlock the board, I said. But not for you, and not until Agent Kessler clears the hardware, because there's something else. I looked at the data stream I had pulled up on the side monitor. It wasn't just tonight. The logs went back weeks. Agent Kessler, I said, pointing at the screen. When I triggered the stop, the system did a deep diagnostic on all active trains. Look at this. I highlighted a column of data. Train 909 wasn't the only one, I said, the realization making my stomach churn. Look at the maintenance flags for the last month. Hundreds of them. Deferred. Overridden. Manager override. I turned to Luke. He was staring at the floor. You didn't just ignore one sensor tonight, I said, my voice rising. You've been systematically disabling safety sensors on the entire fleet for 3 weeks. You've been running ghost trains, cargo moving without active monitoring to speed up the network. Kessler walked over and looked at the screen. Her eyes went wide. My God, she whispered. He turned off the heat sensors on the wheel bearings for the entire heavy haul division. If I hadn't stopped them tonight, I said, looking at Reed, it wasn't a question of if a derailment would happen. It was a question of how many towns would have been wiped off the map. Gabe stepped forward. That's not negligence, Mr. Reed. That's depraved indifference. That's criminal. And if the company knew... I didn't know, Reed shouted, losing his composure for the first time. He pointed at Luke. He was hired to optimize. He sent me reports saying efficiency was up 20%. He never told me he was stripping the safety protocols. Ignorance is not a defense, Enzo, Gabe said coldly. But right now, you have a choice. You can go down with him, or you can step aside and let the professionals clean up this mess. Reed looked at Luke, who was now weeping silently into his hands. Then he looked at me. Oliver, Reed said, his voice shaking, get the trains safe. Please. I sat down in my chair. It felt right. I put my hands on the keyboard. Mary, I said, not looking back, get on the radio, tell the crews to hold position. We're going to inspect every single wheel on every single car before we move an inch. Yes, sir, Mary said, her voice strong for the first time all night. I began the unlocking sequence, but as the screens turned from red back to yellow, I knew the war wasn't over. We had won the battle, but Luke Richardson was just the symptom. The disease was the culture that put profit over lives. And I was about to perform surgery. The sun was just beginning to bruise the horizon with purple and gray when the real cavalry arrived. It wasn't just the forensic team Agent Kessler had summoned. It was the FBI. The operations center, usually a fortress of solitude, had turned into a fishbowl. Men and women in windbreakers stamped with federal acronyms swarmed the floor, tagging terminals, seizing hard drives, and photographing the main board. Luke Richardson sat in a corner, guarded by 2 federal agents. The arrogance that had defined him 3 hours ago had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified small man in a wrinkled suit. But he wasn't done fighting. This is entrapment, Luke shouted as a tall agent approached him with a pair of zip ties. I was authorized by the board to maximize efficiency. I have emails. I have memos. We know, Agent Kessler said, walking over with a tablet in her hand. We found the memos, the ones where you explicitly instructed the IT department to disable the excessive warning protocols on the bearing sensors. That's not efficiency, Mr. Richardson. That's conspiracy to commit industrial sabotage. I demand a lawyer, Luke spat. You'll need one, Gabe said, leaning against a desk, sipping a cup of coffee he had miraculously acquired. Probably a team of them, because the EPA is also on the line. Apparently, they frown on playing Russian roulette with chlorine gas in a watershed zone. Luke stood up, his face twisted in a snarl. He looked at Enzo Reed, who was standing by the window, studiously ignoring him. Enzo, tell them, Luke pleaded. You wanted the numbers up. You told me to do whatever it takes. The CEO turned slowly. His face was a mask of corporate indifference. I told you to improve logistics, Luke. I didn't tell you to turn off the brakes. You went rogue. It was the oldest play in the corporate book, the sacrifice. Reed was cutting the infected limb to save the body. You coward! Luke lunged toward Reed, but the agents were faster. They slammed him against the wall, not gently. The sound of cuffs clicking shut echoed through the silent room. As they marched Luke toward the exit, he passed my desk. He stopped, breathing heavily, and looked at me. You're finished too, Kelly, he hissed. "You locked out the network. You cost them millions. You'll never work in this town again." I looked at him, then at the board where the lights were slowly turning yellow as Mary and the team brought the systems back online, safely and slowly. "Maybe," I said calmly, "but I'll sleep at night. Can you?" They dragged him out. The heavy security doors hissed shut, sealing his fate. The room let out a collective breath. "Mr. Kelly," Agent Kessler said, turning to me, "technically, you did access a protected system without authorization." "Arrest me," I said, holding out my wrists. Kessler smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "However, under the Whistleblower Protection Act, and given the imminent danger to public safety, we are classifying your actions as emergency intervention. You're not going to jail, Oliver. You're going to be our star witness." 3 days later, the setting changed from the gritty, coffee-stained dispatch floor to the plush, silent boardroom of the corporate headquarters in Manhattan. The table was mahogany, long enough to land a plane on. On one side sat Enzo Reed and the company's legal team, 5 sharks in gray suits. On the other side sat me and Gabriel, the Gavel Moretti. Gabe didn't bring a team. He didn't need one. He brought a single thick binder, which he dropped onto the table with a heavy thud. "Gentlemen," Gabe started, not bothering to sit down, "here is the situation. The Federal Railroad Administration has suspended your operating license for the Northeast Corridor, pending a full safety audit. The EPA is fining you $50,000 per day per violation. By our count, looking at the logs Oliver secured, that's about $40 million in fines." The lead company lawyer, a man with a nose like a hawk, leaned forward. "Mr. Moretti, we are aware of the regulatory issues. We are here to discuss Mr. Kelly's termination and the non-disclosure agreement we expect him to sign in exchange for leniency." I almost laughed. They still thought they had the upper hand. Gabe did laugh. It was a terrifying sound. "Leniency?" Gabe opened the binder. "You seem to be confused. We aren't here to beg for his job back. We are here to offer you a lifeline." He slid a photo across the table. It was a printout from the ghost logs showing the heat signatures of the wheel bearings on train 909. They were glowing white-hot. "If Oliver hadn't pulled that switch," Gabe said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "that train would have derailed in the suburbs of Philadelphia at 4 a.m. The casualty models estimate 3,000 dead within the first hour. Your company wouldn't just be bankrupt, you would be on trial for manslaughter. Mr. Reed, you would be looking at 20 years. Reed paled. He knew it was true. "Oliver Kelly saved this company," Gabe continued. "He saved your reputation, your stock, and your freedom, and in return, you fired him." "What do you want?" Reed asked, his voice hollow. "First," I spoke up, leaning forward, "I want the efficiency strategy scrapped, completely. We go back to the standard safety protocols, 2-mile buffers, mandatory physical inspections, no more ghost trains." "Done," Reed said immediately. "Second," Gabe added, "Luke Richardson is the fall guy, but the culture came from the top. We want an independent safety oversight committee, and we want Oliver Kelly to chair it, with veto power over the board on all safety matters." The lawyers whispered frantically to Reed. Giving a union employee veto power over the board was unheard of. "That's highly irregular," the hawk-nosed lawyer said. "So is bypassing brake sensors," Gabe shot back. "Take the deal, or we walk out of here, hold a press conference, and show the world exactly how close they came to dying last Tuesday." Reed closed his eyes. He looked tired, defeated. "Agreed," Reed whispered. "And one more thing," I said. "Mary Kim, she gets promoted to senior dispatcher. She held the line when it mattered. I want her running the night shift." Reed nodded. "Fine." Gabe closed the binder. "Then we have an agreement. Gentlemen, try not to kill anyone before we sign the paperwork." The morning mist was rising off the lake, curling around the pilings of my dock. It was 6 a.m., a time I used to spend staring at monitors, drinking bad coffee, and worrying about train schedules. Now, I was holding a fishing rod, drinking good coffee, and listening to the birds. I didn't take the job as chair of the safety committee. I realized during that meeting that I was done with the corporate fight. I had taken the settlement, a number that Gabe had negotiated with ruthless efficiency, and I had retired. I still consulted, of course. I popped in once a month to terrorize the new managers and make sure Mary Kim, now the youngest master dispatcher in the company's history, was being treated right. But my days of watching the big board were over. The investigation had been thorough. Luke Richardson was serving 5 years in a minimum security facility for federal safety violations. The company's stock had taken a hit, but it was recovering largely because they were now marketing themselves as the safest rail network in America, a slogan they paid me a consulting fee to use. The life twist wasn't that I destroyed the company, it was that by stopping it, I saved it. The stopped trains didn't cost them money in the long run. They saved them from total annihilation. I reeled in my line, checking the bait. I thought about that night often, the moment I pressed the enter key, the fear, the certainty that I was throwing my life away. But looking out at the calm water, I knew I had made the only choice that mattered.